And last but not at least, we will hear a few words from Scott, who was tasked to evaluate our efforts and the pilots.
All right. Cheers. Thanks, Gabor. And try not to kill myself getting on stage. It'd be just right up my alley. So yeah, I want to just give a quick shout out to not only Joe and Francisco and Hassan for doing all the great work. Basically, they've shown you the how of OSCAR. And what I sort of got tasked with was then looking at like how we came out the other side when we actually ran the pilots and the workshops. So basically, what was the impact of what we were doing in terms of real outcomes for the people who participated in the pilots? So basically, there was three main objectives that we were trying to look at. So there was the, understand the needs of our workshop registrants. That was one of the first things, and we did this through a pre-workshop survey. We also then wanted to understand essentially, how did the eDoer application perform when we did it in a real life sort of testing environment as far as the pilot days were concerned, and obtain users real-time feedback, essentially. And the third thing that we can really look at then is, evaluate the implementation of the workshops as a whole, as far as like, did they foster positive learning experiences, and how did it work in that online sort of learning format? So here's an insight, and of course, sorry, I probably didn't properly introduce this before. I do come from an economics, business statistics background, so I like histograms. Everything from here on in is histograms. But it gives you an idea of if we start at the top left, we've got our age distribution. So this is from the pre-survey. This is the people who registered to participate in the OSCAR pilot days. We had 89, I think, at least registrants on the survey side of things. So that gives you an idea of our sample size that we were dealing with here. Most people were in that sort of 26 to 35 age bracket, a few later career professionals, but there was also some other people from different age brackets. And I think that shows sort of the reason for the diversity, especially in that group. We also asked a gender question, essentially, as to whether people identified with male, female, perhaps non-binary, or they just didn't want to reply. So we left that up to them. This was an optional question. And what we found was overwhelmingly the number of participants who registered for our workshops were female. And this then becomes sort of one of those interesting questions for us in terms of especially the researcher space. If we're targeting young researchers with mental health and career planning workshops, why is it that we have more female registrants? Is it because males perhaps don't really want to talk about their mental health as much, or are as interested in career planning, or maybe it's a little bit easier for them? Or is there other factors going into this? So we found it quite interesting that we had a majority of female registrants for the workshops. We then also asked our participants when they were registering for the workshops whether they had any caring responsibilities. Did they have any sort of external factors that might be affecting them as far as their capacity to do research, as far as the caring responsibilities were concerned? And we did have, a number of people obviously with children, but there was also people with other caring responsibilities, including elderly or parents. So this was interesting because it starts showing you how dynamic and the challenges that people are dealing with in their home environment are also then perhaps going to impact their mental health and their career planning options as we go forward. We then also asked them the questions whether or not they identified as international researchers or not. And this was also interesting for us, especially coming from the Marie Curie Alumni Association, where we're mainly focusing on international research and mobility of researchers, as to who was after the career planning and mental health support. And we found that, the majority of people, and that might become more apparent because of who we were disseminating the survey to, but most people were coming from that international researcher space. So that gives you a bit of an overview as to who was coming into the workshops. Now, in the classic online format situation as well, we might have had 89 registrants for the workshops. We ran 2 pilot days, but in the end, we only had, I think it was sort of, maybe about 25, 30 people participate overall. You know, there was sort of a large number of people who just didn't show up on the day. And that's okay. We can expect that to happen in a lot of online formats. One of the questions that we then wanted to do, and so we had the numbers here that you're sort of seeing is based on around about 20 respondents in total who completed the exit survey for us. And when we started looking at our eDoer application, you know, we asked them the questions like, you know, did you find whether or not it was easy to navigate? And the vast majority of people did. This is where I like to differentiate between what I call, oh, that's interesting, and what's important. So what we found interesting is that, yeah, the vast majority of people are very much up towards the, yeah, strongly agree, they were happy with the application. However, there was a few who had difficulties along on the day. And that was actually why it was important to have some technical support and people available when we were running the workshops. The other side of that is whether or not they understood the instructions. We can see, again, we get some quite varying responses here. There was a number of people who understood the instructions quite well, some who really struggled. And this was, I think, becoming more apparent as well, because we were using, I think, the desktop client, an earlier version of eDoer at the time. So there was still a number of bugs that we knew about, but we sort of endured with. And I think that's sort of what we see coming through the evaluation. I think what was most important, though, and a good sort of resounding result for us as far as proof of concept was concerned, is that when we looked at the learning topics that were being selected, most people agreed that that met their needs. You know, there was a few obviously outliers down the lower end, but and they're important. We'll come back to those in a little while when I talk about feedback. But for the most part, we were very happy with at least as far as the algorithm and its capacity to select the right topics, that was well founded. And then, of course, do people recommend this to other people? And we got sort of fairly good distribution there, mostly in the positive side of things, but there's still some room for improvement there. And we'll talk about actually maybe in a second what's happened on that room for improvement. When we talk about workshop quality, this was also a really nice finding for us overall, because we wanted to ask those questions, and this actually relates to the conversations we're having this morning about developing communities. You know, when you're doing a mentoring session, you want to feel connected to your mentor. You want to feel like you have some relationship with the people there. So we asked them the questions whether or not they felt like they fostered positive connections. And when we look at that histogram in the top left-hand corner, yeah, resoundingly, it was a really good outcome, very positive. So in that regards, we felt very excited that, okay, how we'd structured the workshops and we're going about the mentoring process was really quite effective. When we asked them about the amount of communication with their mentors, we get a little bit more of a broader distribution, but again, majoritively positive. No one had sort of anything negative or disagreed, so to speak, on our scales with this particular statement. I think what was interesting is that if we compare the top right-hand corner to the bottom left, is that we see essentially asked a similar sort of question. I developed a sense of connection with my session peers. We see a lot more variation there. And this is just, I think, one of the challenges that we would expect to have when we're running any sort of online workshop, is that sense of connection and the relationship that you have, not only with peers, but perhaps with the mentor, varies a bit. And so we see that in actually both the bottom right-hand graphs there. So we then come to, I think, what is most important, and it's the classic post-survey question, you know, would I recommend this workshop to other people? You know, and astoundingly, you know, we had most people agree. And as far as our scale was concerned, some people were neutral to the experience, but pretty much everyone was either positively agreeing or very strongly agreeing with the experience. So I think that's a testament to actually all of the hard work that we've had from all of the people who have put in the time for our programming, and also for the mentoring sessions and the content they've created there. So from an evaluation perspective, we were quite happy with this. What you don't see and what I won't present today is, of course, we solicited a number of open-ended question responses as well from the participants in the workshop, where they were able to provide us with detailed feedback on a more direct basis. And that's the sort of feedback that we've actually used now to improve eDoer and the mentoring process. And I think Gabor might even touch on sort of where the future lies for eDoer on that front. So yeah, thank you very much. That's my little bit on the evaluation side.
Yeah, thanks a lot.